I am a bit obsessed with insight, which is helpful since that's what I do for a living. But to be more specific, I'm really obsessed with what makes people tick, why they do what they do, why they choose the media they do, why they buy the products they do, how they find out about stuff. So actually, Kat was a woman after my own heart. I love this image of her just running and trying to stalk consumers, to real people, to ask them about what makes them tick. I'm also, though, I'm really aware that we are not representative of a lot of the people that we are targeting. We are, in a minority, really, as people who work in publishing and the media. And I know for a fact that I'm not. I will confess to never having used Snapchat, although I think I might have to have a look after today. But I have downloaded it onto my phone. I just haven't done anything with it yet. Now, if you were also, the other thing about us is that, this idea that we aren't representative is something that's been ongoing for a little while in terms of what we've been doing at Newsworks. And if you were at Shift North last year, you will have heard me talk about a project called Sample of One, where we got a group of 25 young agency planners from London and 4 media agency leaders, and we got them to fill in the IPA Touchpoints diary for a week, and just to really show them how completely different to the population their media consumption and habits were. So that that theme has been carrying on, because actually one of the challenges for news brands, and I think you will have heard some really surprising things this morning, one of the challenges for news brands is getting rid of this notion that they are at best old-fashioned and at worst dead. And so actually we have to show that they have a role to play in people's lives. So we sort of realised that more needed to be done in this area, and Vanessa talked a little bit the fact that we've done a research project. So we did it, it's in a number of different stages. We did a quant survey of 1,000 people around the country, and we asked them a whole series of questions about what their attitudes to life were, what their attitudes to risk, generosity, and what they thought particularly about the labels that they were being applied to them. And then we decided, actually, quant research is only part of the story. We needed to get out and actually talk to real people, because we're false people, obviously. But we needed to go out, and so we commissioned Flamingo, who had worked with Tapestry on the quant piece of research with us, and we said, we want you to do it, but do it in a different way. We want you to go out to places where you don't traditionally do focus groups, where you don't have any recruiters, and we want to go to a couple of different places that are just very different and will challenge our thinking about what people are feeling and what is concerning them and how people feel that brands and media represent them. So Flamingo went to Thurrock in Essex, which I think, if from memory, was the 3rd highest leave vote in the Brexit referendum. And they also went to Aberystwyth, in the furthest point west in Wales. And apparently there's only one train line that goes in there. So it's actually relatively isolated. So 2 very different communities. One, on the edge of London, but actually very different to a lot of Londoners, and one, a very isolated community in West Wales. So I'll show you a little bit more about that later, because I'm going to not actually talk very much about what happened with the qual, but I'm going to show you a little film that Flamingo have made for us that really tells the story for itself. So I think the challenges are, when we're planning and when we're doing our jobs, it's about not falling back on received wisdom and the old stereotypes. And actually, we think that we get it a lot better these days because we have lots of data. But actually, it's how we use data that's the important thing, not going back to, the sort of that idea of confirmation bias, so not using data to confirm what we already know, rather than challenging and evolving our thinking. And some of the stories that we've heard this morning, I mean, the things that we're seeing from The Guardian, from The Sun, from The Telegraph this morning, there's a lot of challenging our thinking there. So we wanted really to also to understand the labels that we're putting on people. We talk about millennials, we talk about the metropolitan elite, we talk about, there's all sorts of labels that we put on people, and we want to group people for the ease of targeting purposes, but are we really doing people a disservice in terms of how we're talking about them? So a number of questions that we put together really in terms of the challenges and what we wanted this piece of research to try and start to address. One is, how do we plan in an era of disruption? We're seeing lots of media disruption, and we've seen lots of evidence of that already this morning. But we're also seeing a lot of cultural, political disruption. The changes that we've seen in our country in the last 18 months would have surprised any of us if we talked about those prior to that period. And apparently we're split into groups of people that apparently loathe each other, those who voted to remain and those who voted to leave. And I still get loads of that in discussions on my Facebook feed. And I think also those labels I talked about, actually, are we really doing people a disservice? And also, I think brands and advertisers in this era of disruption can be seen as out of step. They're not really connecting properly with the great British public. And actually, a lot of people, we felt, don't feel represented by the advertising that they're seeing. So I'm going to give you a few snapshots from the Quant survey, just to give you a sense of the sorts of things that we investigated, and then we'll move on to the film. Ooh, Vanessa promised you not many charts. This is not a very easy one to read. But the idea being that actually one of the biggest things that came out in the Quant was the idea that money is one of the biggest grumbles or concerns in our lives. Although the more you earn, the less you worry. Pretty obvious. But actually, there's a strong negative correlation, as we find from the research, between assumed income and how positively people view different groups. So if people think that people earn a lot of money, they're more likely to think negatively of them. So there's a sort of sense of money as something that divides us as a nation. And actually, those assumed to be earning the most being the least popular, and those earning the least being the most popular. And then there are the labels that we put on people, and stereotypes is another thing that we found that divided us. And actually the word millennial, which is bandied about so much, and there are so many different definitions of it, is questioned increasingly even by millennials themselves. And there's a little quote in the film about, well, what's a millennial? I don't really know what it is. And actually just 1 in 4, 18 to 34s is one of the definitions that get used, but only 1 in 4 18 to 34s actually think the term millennial applies to them. They think it's somebody younger, actually. They think it's whatever below 18 is, whatever term we're using for that group now. And actually, only 1 in 5 of them think that their aspirations are similar to what they think the aspirations of millennials are. But on the other hand, they see themselves as being very much similar to the working class and hard-working families. And you'll see a little bit later on about actually hard-working families are one of the most positively viewed groups in the country because people think that they can empathise with them. So if we're using that label millennial to target people, we're just getting it so wrong. We've talked a little bit too much about division. Should we talk a little bit about what unites us? Happiness is one of the things that unites us the most. And actually, we asked people a series of different things about what would make you feel successful. And more than anything, it's about having a happy family life and having good health. So you see, it's actually down at the bottom is, being promoted or being the boss at work or being famous or well-known. It's happy family life and good health that actually unites people. And there is, you'll see in the film that there's a lot more that unites us than actually divides us. And I think over the last 18 months as a country, we have been focusing a little bit too much on the divisions in terms of the country. Labels. I've talked about millennials. Well, age is as unrepresentative as other labels. So this is the percentage of 18 to 34s who would describe themselves as young, only 39%. Honestly, as somebody who's just turned 50, 18 to 34 is very young. Although I don't feel old either. So, but only 29% of those 65 plus consider themselves to be old. Your definition of what is young and old shifts over the years. So, age is not a very representative label. And if we target on, sort of bland age demographics as well, we're just as likely to be missing the point as if we use terms like millennials. Although, 86% of over 65s are what we would term as pensioners. I mean, I don't know what your image of a pensioner is, but it's probably somebody who is in their 80s, but you think about 65-year-olds, 70-year-olds who are, cruising around the world. My in-laws are 75 and they've just been to Norway on a cruise up the fjords. So these are people who are, pretty active and not considering themselves to be old. The other thing that actually is uniting people a little bit is actually this idea of valuing graft and hard work. And this is, we asked people, a series of different groups, which do you have the most positive view? And it's hard-working families, it's people like me, it's the British people, and it's down at the bottom, I'm sorry, people in the media. I don't think they mean us, I think they mean people on the telly. But it's that sense of people just sort of working together, working hard, overcoming the obstacles and the barriers in life that is the thing that they really value. And they want to see that represented in advertising and how we target and how we talk to people. So actually, this is where actually news brands play a really pivotal role in society. Now, we deliberately didn't ask very many questions about news brands in this research because this is about challenging people's notion of what the Great British public are like. But we did ask a few questions. This one is, where do you learn about different topics? And news brands continue to be an important window on the world, whether that's local news, national news, whether that's politics or the world, but also, light-hearted news. I mean, I love the bit about, UK TV. I have never watched Love Island. Sorry, another confession. But this is, news brands are a place where people find out about not just hard, serious news, but actually light-hearted news about the world around them. So they are continuing to be an important window on the world. And the other thing I think is that if we're talking about what is it that differentiates people, how can we look at targeting people? How can we look at actually making our planning better? Then one of the things, we did a bit of an analysis of what differentiates people and how, is it age, is it gender, is it class? What is it that actually differentiates people? And actually, when you look at it, the newspapers you read explain much more of the variance in your views on success, politics, risk, and generosity than simple demographics. So actually, there is a relationship that people have with their news brands that reflect them. It's a two-way relationship, and again, we heard a lot about that this morning. It's a two-way relationship where there is a sense of engagement, and it's backwards and forwards. And actually, the news brand they read reflects their views, and also then they're challenged and made to think differently about things because of the news brands that they read. So there's a lot more on this, and you can find out a lot more on the website. I'll talk a little bit more on that in a minute. But I want to take us back to Thurrock and Aberystwyth. And so we sent Flamingo to these places, and they spent a couple of days. They set up some things in advance, but then they wandered around community groups. They went to age concern meetings. They went to mothers and toddlers groups, and they met people in pubs. So they really wanted to get under the skin of these people and really try and understand what it was. Were we really properly divided as a nation? Were we really united as a nation? There's some lovely characters in here. I urge you to look out for lovely Len. He's our favourite in this film. And I think you'll hopefully be surprised and delighted by this film as much as we have been. It's about 10 minutes, so settle in, get your popcorn if you've got it, and have a little watch.
"2016 was a year marked by disruption, disorder, and division. A year in which it felt as if the very fabric of society was ripped in two. families, cities torn apart in different visions of the future. But in the cracks, we find a desire to heal wounds, to come together, to support one another. Stories of difference and division feel worn out. Instead, we look to what unites us, and there is a lot that does. And we look for a shared vision for the future, an inclusive aspiration. Some labels have felt outdated for quite some time now. Socioeconomic labels in particular feel hard to pin down.
I think now there's not really that much of a difference. Maybe before, like, you could clearly see the distinction between middle and working class.
I don't know whether it's money or whether it's like your background, your education, you know, like for me, it's a bit, the boundaries are a bit blurred.
I thought I was working class because I worked. I thought it was that simple.
You're business people if you're
well,
self-employed.
I am as well. I'm a bit of everything, aren't I, really? I'm a business person. And working class. I'm a working businesswoman. I'm just about managing as well.
Other labels, like millennial, are increasingly questioned, especially by millennials themselves.
Slightly younger than
They'll be
us.
17 by now, won't they?
It's one of those things where it doesn't really define anybody.
And linking values to a particular group is also more likely to cloud our judgment.
Of all those ones that I showed you, which of those would you most identify with? Of all those stereotypes?
Hard-working family.
In fact, we share so much that across generations we increasingly relate to the same label and image. Homemakers and housewives are a thing of the past.
I'd say a dying breed.
Yeah.
More people have got to go to work through.
So they've got 1-2 jobs.
Yeah.
Homemakers, housewives,
And work.
One stereotype remains distinct: the metropolitan elite.
Don't see them.
Not here.
Not around here.
Not here. I'd think London. I'd think London kind of well-to-do, like
Socialites.
yeah.
We feel pulled apart by money and stereotypes, and this distances us from brands and advertising that portray lifestyles that are both unobtainable and undesirable.
Society today is disconnecting everybody so that you're almost creating your little groups of people.
But then when it comes to like voting, we'll try and get together.
Yeah, and that's it. So a case of if we connected better, or if the media portrayed it a bit better, and they were getting us all back together rather than just at special times of the year.
It's always stereotypes. And particularly if you're talking like adverts and stuff like that, you've always got like, you know, like the sexy girl or the weedy guy or the, do you know what I mean? They're all
very pigeonholed.
Yeah.
It's like somebody who's Muslim is like super Muslim sort of thing. There's no sort of middle bit on it. They're either like 100% or like, you know, the same for like Catholics or Christians. It's the same. It's everyone's very. It's like a generic picture's been built up.
At a time when we are looking more to what unites us, our attempts to define and target people are taking us further from the truth.
I think that's what sort of pushes a lot of problems with kids and things, is they've got a sort of false image of what people actually are. You know, when you look at, they look at very crafted and created kind of landscapes. So even things now that are supposed to be about ordinary people become manufactured. Even ordinary is manufactured to look better than what it really is.
The media, advertising and brands feel like they are often out of step with our growing reality. We feel frustrated by what brands and advertisers suggest we should value. Frustrated at the images that we are sold. If we want to speak to our audiences, we need to reshape our understanding of them. We need to tune in to their real hopes and aspirations. We need to show that we understand the values and qualities that they admire today: graft, community, personality.
I read in the paper today about Idris Elba. He did this audition and like hundreds and hundreds of people turned up. And I thought it was quite amazing how, you know, he's obviously come from Hackney, and you know, he's also nice to see that kind of community feel from someone who's in such a high celebrity.
The high street is really nice, and you got a shop like Ollie's and Polly's, for example. And they're quite unique, bespoke shops, not branded shops. I think that's quite nice, and I think that's also quite nice with a lot of the pubs and the things you got here. They're not big branded ones like you have in the city. They got personality.
Whilst we feel the media appeals to us as individuals, it is in fact our ability to help and support one another that we care about the most. Increasingly, people talk with pride about community, generosity, and small acts of helping one another.
I'm a socialist, but we have 2 UKIP councillors, and I work with them. And Fred across the road, did you see his van?
I saw the van.
Yeah, Fred, I was away in Spain for a fortnight, and Fred came across and watered my plants, and he has his UKIP and I have my Labour, and all the neighbours laugh. And yet we talk to one another and we joke about, I always call out, hello you nasty old UKIP man, and they say, oh, how's Jeremy?
We want to be known for our generosity and community spirit.
There's grass out the front of my house, even though it's not mine. I weed along the wall, do my neighbours as well. Still do the front, wash out the front and clean. My neighbours do it, and we just, I don't know, we all do it.
When we go out, we just pay for each other. We don't care about money, or you pay for me, I haven't got that money. We're not like that. We just, if you want to eat, you eat. I'll give you the money, it's not a problem. It's like that with us.
Personal progress is increasingly difficult. We want to pull together and do the mending ourselves.
So somehow the rest of the world needs to come together and sort of discuss how we're going to get ourselves out of it as sort of everyday people.
I'm just going to the Thurrock Gazette because I've heard that they're giving away grants for community ideas, which is what I want to do. I want to set up a community centre, CAF, because there's nothing here. You know, I just want to go on my basic experiences and make it a better place for people to live.
A focus on shared values can bring communities together, even if their demographics and lifestyles seem different.
A few years ago it had a bad reputation. Penparky was like out there, whereas town people don't go up there. There's trouble up there all the time. The youth were running in packs and all this type of thing. But that's totally changed now. People want to come up here and live because of the community spirit we have up here now. The town are the ones that are jealous now, so it's, how can you say, it's one of them situations where we're doing a lot up here with the community, and they are getting involved as well, which is a good thing.
I feel connected. To me, you know, it's not about where you come from, it's about my relationship with individuals.
In this country, the good thing is you can believe what you like. You can think whatever you like, as long as you're not hurting anyone. The freedom of speech, which in this country have.
The high street needs to be rejuvenated. It needs people to accept that we have a lot of immigrants. Come to Grays, let's have some immigrants, let's have some Polish shops.
It's not your title, it's about your actions that actually brings people. So it's more about your heart, so how you relate to people, and genuine, because if you fake it, it's a matter of time before people will get to know who you really are. But if you're genuine in what you do, it reflects in your dealings with people, and people are always drawn to positive energy.
From the cracks of 2016, we find a desire to heal wounds, to come together, to support one another. Stories of difference and division feel worn out. Too much focus on the individual misses our shared need to come together. Labels that define us too rigidly fall on deaf ears, and stereotypes that caricature us and our friends frustrate us. Instead, we look to what unites us, and there is a lot that does. And we look for a shared vision for the future, an inclusive aspiration. We look to the media and brands to celebrate the values of this inclusive aspiration: authenticity, giving back, community, and graft.
So I think that tells the story much better than I ever could. But we've used that to sort of inspire us in terms of how we can actually help people to connect with the Great British public in a more authentic way. Should be a couple of slides. Oh, yeah. So just a few things to finish off with. There are things that pull us apart, but let's not make stereotypes, let's not reflect that back in how we're targeting people, but know what unites us, know what brings us together. And actually, the previous title for this project was Always Check the Label, but do always check the label and your assumptions about the people that you're targeting. And also recognise and explore the new core values that are uniting the Great British public. We've put together a couple of things that will hopefully be helpful from a practical perspective. We've just launched a new planning hub, which really helps people with the bigger and the smaller and the detailed questions about how to plan news brands in today's media landscape. So that will go from, from the biggest questions about what are your objectives of your campaign through to how should I phase a news brand campaign, so really through to the nuts and bolts of how to do it. We're also conscious that research shouldn't live only in presentations like this, but actually it should live in something that you can interact with yourself. So we've already, in the last couple of years, launched some planning tools. We've actually put all the data from the Quant survey from the Great British public into an interactive planning tool where you can go in and choose which audience you want to find things out about and what their attitudes, their concerns are, and then what unites and what divides them. So hopefully that will be useful because then you can download it and do with it what you would like. So enough from me, but thank you very much. And I would encourage you just to go and have a look and explore a little bit further once you're finished with us here today. Thank you.